Hi everybody, so today we're going to be talking about the Thread API and how we can use Python to actually wrap around the API and get the data from the Thread API into Python without really using anything else, just pure Python. So I thought it would be a fun kind of way to demonstrate how to work with APIs and using Python to do so. So we're going to use the Thread API as an example. So if you Google Thread API, you'll find the St. Louis Fed Web Services API comes up. And just to give you a tour of what this is a website that is maintained by the Fed in St. Louis. It has a bunch of economic time series data. So if we want to look at GDP, for example, you can type GDP, gross domestic product comes up, and here it is. So here's the data. Usually GDP is visualized on the units of percent change from a year ago. Kind of cancels out some seasonality for us. And this is what the data looks like for the GDP series. And there is also the unemployment rate series, which I know the code they have for the series ID unrate. So if you click that, this is the unemployment rate. Let's say for the last 10 years, we could see there was a big spike around COVID, so that was April of 2020. So we see unemployment rate was dropping, and then it shot up again, and then it started dropping afterwards. So this browser is somehow able to get the data into the browser, right? And more than that, I can actually change the date frame. So if I press 5, it'll change it to 5 years. If I go to edit graph, I can change the frequency to be annual, and it kind of changes everything, right? So how is the browser doing this? So basically the browser is reaching out to the API that this Fred St. Louis API is reaching out to it, and it's submitting instructions that's saying, hey, I want this data, I want it over this time frame, I want you to transform it by this transformation or that, and the API returns the data back to the browser, and the browser just visualizes. So what we want to do in this video is basically do this except with Python. So in pure Python, can we talk to the Thread API and get it to give us data just like this browser is working? So to start that off, the first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to make an account. So I actually have an account. I'm going to log in. I can remember my password. Okay, so I think I'm logged in now. So yes, I'm logged in. If you go to API keys, so you can make an account. It's free. Once you have an account, they'll ask you for your email. They'll ask you why you're making an account and stuff like that. You just type, whatever for learning or research or whatever. Once you get your account set up, you then go to API keys, and then you can request one, and that'll happen via email. Doesn't take that long to get the API key, but once you get it, you should be good to go. So I actually already did this. I have my API key. I'm not going to show it to you because then you guys can use it and abuse it. But what I'm going to show you now, so let's hop over to VS Code. So I have my API key hidden in this JSON file, so this secrets file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Python notebook, Thread API in Python, my Python notebook. So what we're going to do basically is build a class, a Python class that can actually talk to the API, and we're going to use it to actually get the data. So how we're going to start is we're going to import JSON to get that secret API key. We're going to import pandas because we want to format the data as a table. We're going to import Matplotlib just so we can visualize some data. Then let's just run that. I'm going to go ahead and load the secret. Load up the secrets. So we're going to do with open secrets file result.json r as f for file handle. We're going to do secrets equals json.load f. Okay, so then we should be able to print secrets.keys, and okay, so yes, so I didn't print the value, I just print the keys because I don't want you to see my API key. But yes, there is an API key here. So what we're going to do then is just say API key equals secrets API key. And you can hard code your value here if you want. Okay, so now we have the API key. And let me just run that again. So what we're going to do now is basically start writing the class that will interact with the Fred API. So we're going to do class Fred. I'm going to call it FredPy. And now the way this is going to work is we're going to define the constructor when we call. So for example, when we want to instantiate FredPy object, we would go FredPy, and we actually, we have a choice. We want to pass in the API key because we're going to need that in order for the API to talk to us. So we can say when you're instantiating it, you should pass a token, and the class needs to kind of remember that. So we set it as a property, but let's make this optional. So you may not have to do it. It may be none. And we can define another method that's set token, and it will do the same exact logic. So if we want to, after we instantiate it, we can actually set the API key. So we could do FredPy.setToken API key, and we pass it in the API key that we are reading in from our secrets file. So so far I've written a class that basically just sets a token, sets it to the object. Basically, it doesn't do anything with it. What we're going to need next is basically to define the main method, which is get series. Okay, so get series, it's going to take self, and let's see. So what are we going to do here? So this method will actually call the API and get the data. So if we hop back over to the API and we take a look at it, so let's see. Let me go to Fred API again. Go to the developer API, the Fred API. Now, what do we see here? So here's the API. Each of these is actually a different endpoint that the API exposes. And what that means is you can send a web request to any of these API endpoints. And you need to know how to talk to each of these API endpoints. But if you do know how to talk to them, you can actually make a web request to them, and then it will return data to you. So that's exactly what's happening when we do this, for example. This is an endpoint of the API. So there's always the main domain of the site, / and then there's the endpoint that's being hit. And so the browser is hitting this endpoint with the name GDP, right? That's the parameter that it's passing. So we can talk more about that later, but basically what we're going to zoom into here is the Fred series observations endpoint. This endpoint is the one we want to hit because this is the endpoint that actually gives us the data values for an economic series. So if we click into this one, we can see some examples. Let's go to JSON examples. So in order to talk to this API, it says we make a get request to the domain of the site, right? And then / the endpoint, which is Fred / series / observations, and then question mark, and then all the parameters that we pass to it. So this is the endpoint basically, right? This constitutes the whole endpoint, and then everything after are the parameters that we pass to it. So here we have series ID equals GNPAC. So series ID is a parameter that the API recognizes and understands, and this is the value that it's given. And then ampersand means, another parameter, API key, you pass in the API key. And then the last parameter they pass in this example is file type, we want JSON. So you can see basically it's all in the web request. So talking to this API is all about creating this string that will basically have the parameters to talk to the API and get back the response. The response being something like this. It will be JSON because we're going to specify JSON. So at the top here, there's a bunch of metadata. So it's telling you kind of when the observations start and the units, the file type, and things like that. But in here, observations, the key observations maps to a list of values. So it's a list of dictionaries actually, and each one is a date value, date value, date value, and so on and so forth. So these are actually the data values that we want. So let's go ahead and actually steal this and hop back over to VS Code. So we want our API to talk to that endpoint. So let's go into the constructor and set the endpoint to, actually we'll do this, set the URL to be equal to that query string. I'm going to break it up just so it's more understandable. Okay, so it's the endpoint itself, and then we do, did I miss the, no, that's right. It's the endpoint. Let me hop back over. Yep. So it's the endpoint, and then it's the parameters, right? So series ID is a parameter. This is an actual value, but we want to substitute that with our value, whatever we want to submit. So I'm going to write series ID here as a placeholder. API key, this is their dummy API key. We're going to write key. File type, we actually want it to stay JSON. And maybe there's other data points we want to kind of pass to this API. So if we go back up, you see there's other parameters here. So the ones I think that we're going to be interested in are the observation start, observation end, and the units. So if we look at, for example, observation start, it's just a string formatted just like this. So let's go ahead and use observation start, end, and units. I'm going to steal this. So we're going to also add some more parameters. And let's put the ampersand, which separates parameters. Observation start, we'll write start, ampersand, observation end equals end, and the last one was units equals units. Okay, so this is technically just a string. That's literally all it is. So now what we want to do is in our getSeries method, when we eventually call it, so down here, test getting the GDP series, for example, we want to say data equals Fred pi get series. And what should we pass it in order to get, well, we need to pass it the name, right? Series ID, in this case GDP, right? That's definitely something that we need to tell it. So series ID is something we want to pass it. We also want to pass it the start point of the observation, the end, and the units. So let's do start, end, and units. And so now we kind of get into the meat of this, which is, so now we have to basically plug these values into these placeholders, right? So the way we do that is we say URL formatted, I would call it, is self.url because we assigned it as a property. And the strings in Python have a nice function called format. So we can actually plug in for these placeholders just like this. Series ID equals series ID. Start equals start. End equals end. Units equals units. And so that takes care of this one, this one, this one, and this one. So this format function will literally plug in these values into the string. And the last one is the API key. So we'll say key equals, and we set that as a property called token, self.token. So this will return the URL string with the values inserted into it, which is exactly what we want. So now at this point we've constructed the URL that we're going to actually submit to the API. So now we actually have to make the request. And Python has a module called requests that allows us to do that. So we come back down here, we can do response from the API is going to equal request.get. So this performs a get request. And what are we going to be getting? Well, the URL formatted. That is the final constructed URL query string that's going to be passed to the API in order for it to understand it, digest it, and return back to us a response. And so we can actually just test this out now. And let's return response. And let's see what happens. So I'm going to run this class. And let me give it a start. Let's start at 2005. Let's end at, I don't know, let's say 2021, the end of 2021. And for units, let's see, so for units, if you go back to the API, units is a parameter that takes on one of the following values. So you got lin change 1%, change. So CHG is change 1. What we want is the percent change from a year ago, which is commonly used with GDP. So PC1. So I'm going to steal this and plug this in here as a string. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to go ahead and preview. I'm going to run this. And then let's see what the data looks like. So response 200. So this is actually when we use the request object, it returns a response object. And we see the response is actually 200 status code. So if we write status code, we actually get 200. So that actually means it was successful. And if we can actually get the contents like this. So this is actually the contents, and it should look similar to the example we saw in the API documentation, which it is. So just to clean this up a little bit, if you remember from the example they had here, so if we go back up here, we go to examples, the response is a bunch of metadata, and then observations is the key that links to the value, which is a list of the actual data. So we're going to want to kind of access that. So this response object actually has a property, a function called JSON, and that will turn it into a Python dictionary for us. And then that starts to look familiar now, because now it's all the metadata we just saw, and then the observations key. So if we go ahead and skip all of the metadata and only look at the observations, we see we get a list of objects, which are all the date value pairs, right? So this is where it starts to get interesting, because now what I can do is call pandas data frame on this, and pandas knows how to read a list of objects and convert it into an actual data table. So we've just done that. And we actually only want the date and the value, right? The date and the actual value of the series. And it would be nice if we could, so first of all, let's just pat ourselves on the back. We actually got the data into Python, right? So we actually would like this not to say value, we would like it to actually say GDP. So we're going to do a little pandas magic here, and we're just going to say, hey, rename columns value GDP, right? So that's good. It gets us our GDP, and it looks good from here. So, well, we should do a few other things. So actually, what we should do is we should make sure that the data types are correct, because a lot of times APIs will pass just text string. So this, even though it's a number, it's interpreted as a text. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And likewise for this, we want this to be thought of as a date. So what we're going to do is say reassign date, and we're going to call PD to date time on the date column. So this is going to say create a column date, which already exists, so it reassigns it. And it's what it was before, it just turned into a datetime. And we're going to do the same thing for value, except for value, we're going to make sure that it is a float and not a string. And then at the end, we reassign value to GDP. So this runs again, and it's all good. So now, this is actually everything we wanted. We kind of proved out what we wanted to do. Now let's just kind of package this up. So I'm going to cut this and actually bring it into the method here. So what we're going to do is say, so if the response was successful, extract data from it. So if response status code equals 200, else. So if the set response is 200, then we're actually going to paste in that logic we had. And we're going to say data equals this. So let's call it output data. So output, actually, no, we can leave it as data. And this is actually response. So if the response's status code is 200, we know we were successful. So take the response, convert it to JSON, extract the observations, and then do this little bit of data kind of transformation here to end up with the data we actually want. And this is what we're going to return, right? And actually, instead of hard coding GDP here, I actually have the argument as the series ID, right? And if we passed a different series ID, then it should be the one that it's called here. So we could just replace that with series ID there, and that should work. And then handling some errors. So here, for example, if the status code was not 200, maybe we want to just raise an exception, you know, and maybe just want to say, you know, bad response from API status code equals, and then we go response status code. So we raise an exception and we say what the status code was, right? And actually, so return data, we don't need this anymore. So if the response is 200, we return data, otherwise we raise an exception. So let's run this, and let's rerun this, and let's check now what our data looks like if we print it out. So again, it's exactly what we want, and everything seems to be working properly. So we can now check some last minute things. So if we scroll back up here, we see that we had this if-else statement. So what if the status code is not 200, for example? We're supposed to raise an exception that there's a bad response from the API. So let's just test that out. So, you know, this is like a API of an API kind of, right? So the API talks to the data. This is like an API, well, this would be called an SDK, but it talks to the API, right? So it's like layers of translators, basically. This is one of the translators. So the translator needs to know, like, when it goes wrong, it needs to be able to pinpoint and isolate what the problem is, right? So if the status code is not 200, it means something happened when we talked to the API, right? Something bad went wrong. So let's say, you know, we passed in some crazy series name that we know doesn't exist, like this, right? What if we tried that? If we do that, we actually get an exception. Exception is raised and it says bad response from API. Status code is 400, which is exactly what we caught here, right? So we know that that's working well, so that's great. Another thing we might catch is something like programmer error. So what if the programmer who was using this SDK, they forgot to set the API key, or they set it as something wrong, right? They typed it wrong. So how would that work? So maybe what we can do is say you only try to hit the API if there's a token set, right? So if the token is not none, right? So if it actually exists, this will evaluate to true, and it will go ahead and execute the response, right? Otherwise, we raise an exception saying you did not specify an API key. Right? So let's test that out. If we run that, let's instantiate another FredPy object. But this time, let's not specify the token, and let's see what happens if we try to do it. Well, we get another exception. This time it says exception. You did not specify an API key. So you can see in this way we learn to control the errors and we flow the logic in, and we make sure that the person using this knows where they go wrong to be able to fix it, and that increases usability, and it helps the programmer diagnose where things go wrong. So that's always important, right? If you want a useful API, you need it to be easy to use, and this is one way to make it easy to use. So let's bring back this here. And last thing we want to do is just visualize the series to make sure the data looks right. So I'm going to run this again. Let's run this again and run this again. We have our data. So let's just visualize the series. So let's use some Matplotlib for that. So let's go big size. Let's do 12 by 7, and let's see. So we want to go ahead and do a PLT plot, data date, data and GDP, and then PLT.show. Let's get rid of title. Fred, data from Fred API. Let's move the show down. Let's see how this looks. Alright, so this looks exactly like what we see in the API. And we see the big dip that corresponds to COVID here, which is great. Why don't we add another series here and visualize it together? So let's get the unemployment rate data. So if we do unemployment data, we can use our FredPy object. Get series, and this time series ID. Oops, I can't spell. Series ID is going to be unrate, and let's use the same start and end periods. So I'll grab this from here, paste that in, and this time we don't want percent change from a year ago. Unemployment rate is already a percentage, so if we go back to the API and look at the units parameter, LIN or lin means levels, no transformation. That's what we want. We want no transformation. Just give me the percent, which is what it is. Change that to LIN. So we can run this. And now let's plot it here, actually. Let's see if that worked. So go here, unemployment data. And this should be called unrate. So let's see if that worked. And it looks like it did. Let's actually give it a legend now because we have two series and we can put it on the upper left. It doesn't like that I did that. It just, that's what label. Give it the name. Unemployment rate. Left equals upper left. And I think actually, let me just call legend on it. Put it up there anyway. Great. So yeah, we see again, this is actually what we saw when we were looking in the browser. And I don't think I have it up again, but I can bring it up. Unrate. And we had since 2005, I believe. So let's change this to 0101. And this was 2021, 1201. So yeah, that looks exactly like we have in Python for the yellow unemployment rate series. And that pretty much does it. So hope you enjoyed the video. This was a video showing how to talk to APIs using Python. Hopefully you guys find it useful, and yeah, till next time.